Welcome back to Liberty Bytes on the Think Liberty Network. I'm your host, William Gadsden. You can follow me personally on Twitter at William_Gadsden, or check out my Facebook page at William Gadsden Political Commentator. As an aside, apparently Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg have formed a Voltron-like social media form of Big Brother, and I'm presently unable to post on either of those accounts. And if you don't know what Voltron is, then I quietly weep for your childhood. Follow them anyway, as I'm working on getting access to them as soon as possible. I do still have my William Gadsden personal Facebook, so go ahead and hit that up if you'd like to while I get the others worked out. Also, be sure to check out Think Liberty on Facebook, Twitter, or wherever your favorite social media outlet is. I guarantee you we are on them. Give us a follow and a like for updates on new episodes and more. But for this particular episode, I want to attempt to challenge your views of opposing political ideologies. So moving forward, let's forget about the political compass, forget about the right and the left and other arbitrary labels, forget about any traditional view of the political landscape. Instead, think of politics, especially politics in America, of a vast, complex ecosystem of different species reproducing, interacting, and most importantly, adapting to their environment. So let's talk about natural selection. And no, I'm not talking about butt-scratching chimpanzees turning into humans. Personally, I think cross-species evolution is bunk for a wide variety of reasons, but we know that environmental adaptation through selection is a fact. Darwin's finches and all that jazz. There are naturally occurring mutations, differences that take place in the same species in a given area, that makes them more efficient at survival and reproduction in their environment. Now, those individual specimens get to pass on those beneficial traits to their offspring, and eventually, the majority or all of the specimens making up that species in that area have those desirable and beneficial traits. If there are any biologists in my whole 150-member audience and I butchered that explanation, get over it. It's an analogy. Moving forward, the same principles are taking place in our political ecosystem, if you will. We're trying different things, whether it be cultural, economic, domestic policy, law enforcement, you name it. We are constantly adapting and experimenting to find out what works and what doesn't. Hopefully basing our decisions on empirical evidence and practicality, although I think we all know that's usually not the case. So naturally, we're going to have far more traits manifesting in different species, if you will. In species, of course, in this analogy being different political ideologies. And some are going to work and some aren't. Some may work a bit in one place, but more or not at all in another. We see new groups forming in the last handful of years alone. We see it in the new trollish right, Trump supporters, and extreme left-wing groups like BAM and Antifa. There are also going to be evolutionary dead ends, looking at you, communism, that still somehow sticks around and stubbornly refuses to die out, despite its pure lack of benefit. So based on that premise, this is where we get everything from neocons, traditional conservatives, paleocons, classical liberals, minarchists, anarcho-capitalists, syndicalists, national socialists, democratic socialists, communists, fascists, and anarcho-communists, all vying for a leg up, all fighting one another for supremacy or the chance to inflate their own causes and leverage benefits or costs on everyone else. But as all of these different movements are adapting and developing and making strategic and tactical decisions, fundamental overlap can be seen between different groups. Think of it like a hugely complex Venn diagram. All things considered, the left, and I use that in the loosest way possible since we're speaking in far more nuance than just the left-right paradigm, is far more unified in its platform. It has been able to stitch together traditional liberals, social justice warriors, democratic socialists, outright communists, etc., into one force of change. In doing so, they have all of the big guns at their disposal. They have the media, academia, and armies of tragically misguided working-class individuals and government bureaucrats, all working as one towards a relatively common goal. And they're very good at it. In order to survive, much less win. We have to start filling in the gaps between the various groups on the conservative right and within libertarianism itself. We need to stop scoffing at one another over things that we disagree with and start unifying over things that we do agree with. One doesn't have to agree with everything in order to be a valuable ally. Now, I've spoken before about bridging the divide between conservatives and libertarians, about uniting over what we agree with. But the more I watch the changes happening in the modern political landscape, the more I am alarmed at what a huge risk we are taking simply by not banding together. We have to form this alliance, or we will be overrun by the force of the authoritarian left. They are growing stronger as we continue to divide amongst ourselves over the simplest things. The good news is that this alliance between conservatism and libertarianism is already happening, whether you want it to or not. The traditional conservative movement that my parents were a part of, the groups that in many ways were just as authoritarian as the modern left when it came to things like gay marriage and marijuana, are falling away. Young people making up the modern conservative movement have more and more in common with libertarianism than ever before, and the two are slowly merging together. I could trot out a bunch of numbers and statistics to support this, but let's be honest, they're going to go one ear and out the other. And besides, this show is to inspire you to look into these ideas for yourselves. Speaking of, the book The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff is an excellent analysis of a lot of this. But you can simply look at the voices and leaders in these movements to know that the change is happening. Where there was Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck that my parents and grandparents listened to, my peers and I are flocking to Gavin McInnes, Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, and Tom Woods. So let's focus on what this new, younger conservative movement, in part or in whole, agrees on with libertarians, in part or in whole. Freedom of association, ending the drug war, freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, free market solutions, free trade, ending endless wars, holding the federal government accountable for its spending and practices, individual rights and liberties. But of course, there is still a but. While it is happening, whether some of us want it to or not, what is under our control is how fast it happens. And in my opinion, it can't happen fast enough. So ask yourself, what are you doing to further bring these sides together? How many others of differing viewpoints have you reached out to for collaboration or even simple discussion? If a Young Americans for Liberty chapter is setting up a free speech wall on your campus, have they reached out to the College Republicans chapter and invited them to join? If there's a campus carry rally or a speaker invited to campus by the College Republicans, have they reached out to the Young Americans the Young Americans Foundation for support? There is so much that we can do to further the larger movement here, if only we put in the effort to do so before time runs out and it's too late for us to do anything. There's a ton of overlap there, but we simply aren't focusing on it as much as we should. Instead, we're creating these divides between groups that, in the long run, hurt all of us far more than it helps. And don't get me wrong, I make fun of puritarians and Trump cucks as much as the next guy. But the fact is, if we don't band together, then we're going to fall apart. And as soon as we fall apart, we will be taken over by the power of the authoritarian left. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us next week to continue to become more liberty-centered with us. I'm William Gadsden with Think Liberty.